It's been hard to find a home for many of the stories of war on this channel. Who wants a 30-second video on the Varangian warriors of Dark Souls 2? But there are fascinating details here, all the same. So here they are, in a more concise format. If you learn something new, consider leaving a like, and if you know everything, consider making a YouTube channel about Dark Souls lore. Let's start with Gravelord Nito, who has had relatively little screen time considering his immense power over death and the dead. For now, I want to prove just how relevant he is as a character, starting with one important item that's often overlooked. It's the effigy shield, found upon a corpse in the catacombs. In an ill-fated plot to destroy the very gods, the followers of the occult once attempted to steal the power of Gravelord Nito, the first of the dead. In Dark Souls, the occult is more accurately defined as this heretical dark magic, used by pagans who are unaligned with and hostile to the gods. Gwyn and co. rightly fear the occult, just as the dead fear the divine. It's effective against their following and kin. Nito's power isn't based on the occult, so if these cultists were interested in the power of Nito, it follows that Nito's power over death extends to the gods as well, and could easily be used as a weapon against them. After all, the Dragon Eye item states, to be alive is to be vulnerable, and the fiery gods are no exception. This tells us that Nito had power over the gods, leverage. And where there's that much leverage, there is a huge story to be told here. But it'll have to wait until we remaster the Prepare to Cry series, I think, for that one. In the end, though, it's probably going to be the story of this immensely powerful entity who just wants to be left in peace at the end of the day, like the rest of the dead. Nito was the first of the dead, as in, he was the first to die when the Age of Disparity began. Before, it's unclear if there was even the concept of death. However, at the complete other end of the spectrum was High Lord Wolnir, who wished to outlive all others and become the last of the dead. To this end, he sentenced a great many souls to death, and he conquered the lords of many kingdoms, and he expanded the mighty Kingdom of the Sands known as Karthus. Wolnir and Karthus deserve their own video too, and they'll be featured really soon, so subscribe for that. Theirs is this story of victory at any cost, and that ethos, that victory at any cost, it characterizes their entire story, and it's a great one. Right now though, in this video, the curiosity I want to talk about is why we don't see their enormous sand kingdom in-game, because it should be right above the catacombs of Karthus, right? But it's not. Instead, above the catacombs of Karthus, we have Farron and the Abyss Watchers. And the reason for this is likely the convergence of the lands. If you didn't know, the lands of Dark Souls 3 are converging together, most likely in response to the lords not sitting on their thrones, almost as if the world is pulling them towards it. This explains the skewed geography of Dark Souls 3, especially the skewed geography of the Kiln or the Dreg Heap. But I want to go a step further with this theory in regards to which lands sometimes become neighbours or next to each other. For example, I think the Abyss Watchers are specifically above Karthus because they are the ones that put an end to that kingdom. I think they're linked to it. According to Hawkwood, after all, the Abyss Watchers will bury a kingdom at the first sign of exposure. And Karthus was literally a kingdom that was buried by the Abyss Watchers. The legacy of their kingdom ended up being confined to the catacombs where that abyss first appeared. And perhaps that battle to crush Karthus was also the last battle of the Abyss Watchers. And as the lands converged, causality sort of linked these two kingdoms together. Fate often works this way in Dark Souls, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was true. Speaking of fate, let's talk about the Wolf Knight set, originally worn by Artorias the Abyss Walker. It reads, a vanquished knight left behind only wolf's blood and a legacy of duty. The Undead Legion of Farron was formed to bear his torch, and the armor of these Abyss Watchers suggests their eventual end. That last part isn't actually an accurate translation. In Japanese, instead of the armor suggesting their eventual end, the Abyss Watchers actually saw their own final moments in the armor. The difference being that they were actually keenly aware of this abyss-soaked fate that awaited them. This gives way more flavor to these characters, because having an iron will was a famed characteristic of Artorias, and his Abyss Watchers lived up to that. They persisted in their duty, fully aware that they were literally fighting against their own inevitable fate. That is an iron will that is worth being commended for. Another interesting nuance of the Japanese translation is the actual name of the followers of Farron. These were the Hollows, or the Undead, that trudged after the Undead Legion, disposing of any stragglers who ended up falling to the abyss. But these followers of Farron are more accurately called ghosts, revenants, or spirits in Japanese, which really suits them, for as we know from before, those in the Undead Legion have already seen their inevitable demise. They're already ghosts. Their fate to die is who they are, which really suits the definition of revenant or spectre or ghost. And if you're a member of the Undead Legion and you have partaken of the old wolf blood, perhaps falling to the abyss isn't the only grisly fate that awaits you. This is something that passed me by for the longest time. So, from what I hear, these creatures are called Lycanthropes in the official guides for the game. Lycanthrope means wolf-possessed, and seeing as this is the Farron Swamp, it follows that being wolf-possessed would have something to do with the wolf blood that the Abyss Watchers are willingly partaking in. It seems as if there's a potential negative side effect of this blood, something that turns one into a beast, not dissimilar to what happens in Bloodborne. In addition, the Hollows here are called Hunters of the Possessed, and they're probably also responsible for the crucifixion that's taking place. And it turns out, those crosses make pretty good chairs. Orbeck was once a Vinheim scholar, although he likens it to being more of an assassin than a scholar. He expresses a lot of resentment for the lack of sorcery he ended up getting taught.
What a fool I was, thinking one day I would learn real sorceries. When I became undead, I was exiled from the school. But here I am, now, exploring the depths of sorcery.
The nation of Vinheim, and by extension their White Dragon School, is a pretty violent place. Note how they have all these aggressive and duplicitous sorceries to their name. Hell, even Big Hat Logan, a complete social recluse, is famed for his magical arsenal that emulates weaponry, like swords and spears and shields. So you would think that there would have been some event in this nation's history that warranted such war-based magic development. And it's for this reason that Vinheim becomes our most likely victim of a war with the Way of White. The miracle magic barrier explains that there was a short period in history where clerics and sorcerers opposed one another. It was for this reason that even the most common Way of White cleric found it necessary to cast some form of magic barrier, and so this more simple common version of the barrier was derived from Havel's original Great Magic Barrier. Oddly, the persecution of sorcerers in Dark Souls 2 crops up in an item description you really wouldn't expect it to. It appears in the Varangian sword description in Dark Souls 2. If you've forgotten, and no one's gonna blame you if you have, the Varangians were the pirates that Vendrick forced into hard labor at No Man's Wharf. And it's only mentioned in a couple of descriptions, but there was actually a campaign to restrain and capture them, because they were terrorizing the northern seas, as well as hunting sea monsters, apparently. Beyond these seas, this description reads, is an unexplored continent, said to be the home of things inhuman. I'm always really intrigued by these parts of the Souls series that we only hear of and we never really see. And in my opinion, if there was ever to be a Dark Souls 4, one of the few ways they could go forward is by fulfilling Aldrich's visions of the Age of the Deep Sea. And this is our only mention of sea monsters that might be prepared for the world that might exist in that time. Not all people were as easily conquered as the Varangians were, however. Throughout all of the stories, Mira remains one of the most resilient nations, even though they're said to be constantly at war with their neighbors. Mira had a couple of things that were worth protecting. One was the holy water of Mira, which was this ancient well that is said to have retained its divinity throughout all these years. Its water scalds the skin of hollows and undead, and I always wondered why hollow-fearing people like Vendrick didn't make a concentrated effort to acquire this holy water. Because Vendrick definitely did have his eyes on the wonders of Mira. In addition to their holy water, there was also the wonder known as Geisteel, which was this precious alloy that was created within their country and mastered by the blacksmith Llewellyn. Instead of conquering Mira to obtain it, however, Vendrick simply bought out the blacksmith. He offered him an obscene amount of money, and so Geisteel was introduced to Drangleic. But more than their steel and their holy water, Mira was known for its knightly code of honor. Such was their legend that even the peasantry dreamed of becoming knights, but their chances are said to have been about 1 in 10,000. There's another famous success story told in exactly the same way, except it takes place in Ferosa, and it's about shieldless Lothian, who was this fearless warrior who was born a peasant and rose to the rank of general. Such was his determination that he always fought without a shield on the battlefield, so he always went to battle at risk of his own life, and it's no surprise that that inspired his men. However, one day he disappeared, and one theory supplies that he tired of how frail human opponents were, and he went on instead to slay the dragons of legend. His axe is imbued with lightning, and it appears to support that theory. After this, however, Ferosa was destroyed by war, and its people scattered to a bunch of other lands as sellswords. Makes you wonder what would have happened if he didn't run off to slay dragons. But dragons aren't so easily conquered. Even dragons that were tamed throughout the generations in Lothric appear to have turned on their own fortress as soon as there are no sane knights to keep them in check. Amongst the ruins of this place, Lothric had one final secret that we've kind of only really uncovered now. Remember how we mentioned the convergence of lands earlier? When we were talking about the kingdom of Karthus and how its catacombs drifted closer with Farron up above them? Well, the Japanese description for the straight sword of the Lothric Knights states, "It is said that the Lothric Knights, along with their flying dragons, once conquered everything that drifted." The word for drifted is the exact same one the Japanese use to describe convergence in other dialogues. Therefore, it's possible that the Lothric Knights, seated upon their wyverns, were this fire-breathing defense force against that convergence, conquering any kingdoms that would begin to converge, infringe, or drift upon the space of their own. So I hope I left you with a lot to think about. And I've never said this, but be sure to ring the bell if you want to be summoned here immediately when there's a new video. So you can get the honor, the privilege, and the glory of being able to say you were first, earning you the admiration and envy of your peers. I'll see you next time.